I'll now share my screen. Brilliant. So good morning, everybody, and yeah, nice to see some familiar names on the webinar this morning. I know some of you certainly either through Diatech or maybe through other kind of events that we also attend, such as CETA and various type of BIM engagements and events around the country. So good to see you all. So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Jonathan Reinhardt. I'm a technical consultant here with Diatech. And then my background is primarily in architecture, but I work extensively across BIM within architecture, engineering, and construction on a daily basis with Diatech. So I'm working with lots of different companies, some of the companies I can see online, and then lots of other companies as well. So that's kind of my role with Diatech. So this is the first of a series of webinars that we're going to be running every single month. So we have them scheduled and they're in the calendar to run for the next 12 months, and they will be running the first Friday of every month. I appreciate today is not the first Friday of every month. I was just keen to kick it off. So generally going forward, it will be the first Friday of every month. So if you've signed up for this one, you will receive an email for the next one, and you'll probably receive the same calendar invite as well. So once you're signed up for one, you'll be signed up for them all. You don't have to attend them by any means, but you will receive a recording then as a result. So that's just some housekeeping. And yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to launch. I just got a small poll here. Just want to see I suppose the type of experience we have on the call, just so I know how to kind of dive a bit deeper into what we're going to look at today. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll there, and that should be on your screen now. Just 2 questions in it. If you're able to answer, that'd be great. Thank you. So lots of results still coming in. That's fantastic. A good mix of, it seems to be kind of 50-50 split between people that have used the common data environment and people that haven't used the common data environment. Slowly increasing to maybe less people, which is good, obviously. That's why we're here today to hopefully show you a bit more on that. And it's almost a perfect split between architecture and engineering. And I appreciate engineering has, it's probably quite a broad term, so my apologies for that, but we've a good split across the various disciplines there as well. So that's fantastic to see. So thank you all for completing that. Yeah, so we've kind of a 40% of people have used the common data environment or CDE, and 60% have not. So that's kind of sets the where I'm going to start today. Is I'm just going to introduce what is a common data environment. And as you know, the title of this webinar is creating a common data environment using Autodesk Docs. That's what the first topic of this series we're going to cover. We'll have different topics covered every session, and they will vary from the previous one generally. And we're trying to keep it as varied as possible, just to obviously make it as valuable to yourselves working in the industry as well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to kick off with a couple of slides, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to get into a live demonstration just to talk through the software of what is Autodesk Docs, but in terms of using it as a common data environment. So first of all, I'm going to explain what a common data environment is, and then I'll be getting into the software itself as well. I have a data set or a test project set up in the background, and I'll be going through how that applies to particularly in the context of ISO 19650, how that fits within that as well. So I'm just going to kind of set the scene here with what is a common data environment effectively. So if any of you are familiar with the ISO 19650 standard itself, this is the ISO standard for sharing of BIM information, or organization and digitalization of information, as it's specifically called as well. So that's what we base a common data environment on. and then we'll understand a bit more about that once we get into it. If you're familiar with the documents, the common data environment element of it is in both part 1 and part 2, only a couple of pages long each, as well, just to understand what you may have been requested by a client, by a contractor, on any projects to use a common data environment. And it's not strictly that you just have to address it to work with ISO 19650, but common data environment can be used on any size project, by the way. It's either dictated by the client or by the type of project. If it's to ISO 19650, it may be to a different standard. For whatever reason, Autodesk Docs will still work with whichever one you're applying it to, and I'll explain that once we get into it in a bit more. So, a common data environment is essentially a place that we need to store information on a design and construction project. So, as you design information, whether you're architects or mechanical or structural engineering, or producing any sort of design information, a common data environment is defined as a place that we store that information that can be accessed by the rest of the design team and then by the contractor or whoever is implementing that information on site. So effectively, it starts with perhaps it's a BIM model, perhaps it's a set of drawings, a CAD file, specification information, room data sheets, all of this information that you build up on a project as you're building up that design information, that then needs to go to site and needs to be accessed on site as well, or retrieved by the client or retrieved by the contractor. But during the design phase, obviously there's a lot of collaboration happening and coordination across the disciplines, from architects to mechanical engineers to structural engineers, civil engineers. All of the key stakeholders need to collaborate on that information. So storing that information in a place called a common data environment is effectively the most efficient way to work. And there's lots of different types of common data environments out there. And so the one we're going to look at today is Autodesk Docs. So the ISO document itself then, effectively what it states is that you need to have a work in progress state for your files effectively. So they describe it as it being a state of a file. We interpret this to be a folder structure effectively. Now there's different platforms that will do it different ways. The way we're going to look at it today is effectively we're going to look at a folder structure that suits that requirement of the ISO document. So they require you to have a work in progress state for your file. So effectively a work in progress state is where you're working on all of your design files, and those design files need to be protected from other design teams. So for example, the architect team should not be able to see the structural engineering's work in progress files necessarily. You need to protect that information according to the ISO. That just means that information, if it hasn't been issued for whatever reason, if information hasn't been issued into something called a shared area, it stays in the work in progress area, so it hasn't gone through a QA or QC process for it to be shared. So you'll always work from inside your work in progress area, and then when you share information into something called a shared area, it needs to go through something called a check, review, approve transition. I've kind of given this an acronym of CRAT, check, review, approve transition. So as you share information with other design teams, you need to make sure that it's the information that you're sharing is the required information. It meets what's being expected or the deliverables of the project. So you're checking things on drawings, BIM models. You're checking the naming conventions comply, and you're checking that you have all the required information inside your design as required by your deliverables, whether architects or engineers or whatever type of designer on a project. It needs to go through something called a check, review, approve transition. When it's leaving the work in progress area, effectively, it goes through that check, review, approve transition, and that's generally done internally. So let's take architects as an example. If you're sharing a document, you need to have a process in place according to the ISO document that it goes through a certain checking or QA or QC before it reaches a shared area. The reason it does that, or you should do that, is because a shared area is where everybody accesses design files. So potentially that's where you're sharing a CAD file, design file, or a BIM model even. So you want to know that that information that you're sharing has been QA, QC by yourselves before it's been shared, and you're happy for the structural engineers to design their structural framing and their structural elements around your building, or vice versa. depending on the type of project that you're working on as well. And when something leaves a shared area, it then goes into the published area. The published area is information that has been signed off effective for construction. So you kind of have these three key stages. And when it leaves the shared area, it goes through something called a review or authorized transition. Again, that's a quality and QC check as well, to kind of put it quite simply. So you have these three key areas, or these three key states of files that files will travel through on any sort of design related project that's eventually going to be constructed on the proposed site, or whatever the type of project is you're working on. It also recommends something called an archive state. So an archive state is kind of a fourth element to all of these three key elements. Archive state is effectively it's effectively a record of when a file was shared. The revision of that file needs to be archived effectively as an audit trail, and that's the key thing for the archive state. And then the way we interpret this in certain platforms is that we set up a folder structure to accommodate this, and that's effectively what we do in Autodesk Docs, or that's how we achieve it inside of Autodesk Docs, is using particular folder structure. So that's kind of what a common data environment is, put quite simply. And what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to jump into the software itself. I'm going to explain that in a little bit more detail in terms of how that's interpreted in something like Autodesk Docs. So Autodesk Docs is a cloud-based software. You log into it in a browser. So I'll just briefly point out it for a moment. I know that's stuff in the background. So it's effectively a cloud-based environment. You go to acc.autodesk.com if you have a license to it. That's the kind of separate thing. You may have access to it already or not. You go to acc.autodesk.com and then you log in with your Autodesk ID. So everybody has a unique email address to log in. You come in and you go to the relevant project that you want access to. So it's all done in a web browser, acc.autodesk.com. I've got a project in here. It's a residential project in Dublin. And this is effectively a single project within the environment that I've set up as a common data environment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the doc area itself, and this is the primary area that we're going to be looking at today. So this is a cloud storage location. This is a common data environment effectively, and this is how we interpret those ISO requirements into setting up our system here. So what you'll notice is I am inside Autodesk Doc here. There are other add-ons and modules, but for today we're just going to look at Docs. Our further sessions will kind of dive deeper into these elements. Autodesk Docs only include Docs that you see here effectively, and that's all we're going to be looking at today. There are other add-ons, so if you want to keep that in mind for future. So what we explained there, looking at the ISO requirements, in terms of it needs a work in progress state, it needs a shared state, it needs a published state, and an archived state. And the way we understand that and the way it is executed on projects is effectively you set up a folder structure to control that within inside your common data environment. So what I have set up here is just a very simple folder structure. I've got a work in progress folder, I've got a shared folder, and I've got a public folder. Effectively, I've numbered them. They don't have to be numbered. I've numbered them just how I want to number them for my particular setup. So I'm in this particular project. I've added these folders myself. I could add any other folder here if I wanted to. I could then add, if I wanted to, I could add an archive folder, for example, and say, okay, well, that's where all of our archived information is going to go. Let's just take one of these folders, for example. Let's just take the work in progress folder as an example. So if I drop down that work in progress folder, I have set up on this particular project, I've set up different folders for different disciplines and for different companies. The reason I do that is because that allows me then to control access on this common data environment by folder. So inside Autodesk Docs, if I go to my folder structure and if I hover over any folder, and if I go to the three dots at the end and if I go to permission settings, I can see who has access to that folder. So I can see my colleague Dave and myself, and I can also see the BIM manager has access to that folder as well. But what I can also control as a result of that is who else has access to those folders. So let's say I am currently logged in here as my own name that you can see, and ISO requires you, as I said already, to protect your information in the work in progress area. So for example, the structural team should not have access to the architectural team and vice versa inside the work in progress area. They will only have access when something is in the shared area. And that's why we set up, we have a parent folder of shared, and these are all subfolders. The same for work in progress. The parent folder is work in progress, and we have subfolders for each team. What you'll notice for the architectural team, for example, I've got an architectural folder in the shared area, and I have an architectural folder in the work in progress area. And I'm going to show you the reason for that now. So you can see here, I'm logged in here as my own name, Jonathan Orr. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to log in as another user that has reduced access to those folder structures. So what you'll see here now, I'm in another web browser and I've logged in as this Nathan guy, who is also my other email address, by the way. I've logged in as this person. This person is in the exact same project. You can see it's Ready Project in Dublin 001. I can see that project in here, and I can see the shared folder structure. But what you'll notice when I go to the work in progress folder is I actually can't see any of the other work in progress folder. So we'll assume that Nathan works for the architectural team. That person then only needs access to the architectural team. So if I just bring those two windows side by side, and I'm just going to bring those two windows side by side for a moment. So I'm in here as two different users, Jonathan on the left, Nathan on the right. I am an account administrator, so I have complete blanket access on the platform. Nathan is only a project user, so he only has restricted access effectively. So if I go to the work in progress area, and if I go to the architectural folder down here, and if I go to permissions as the administrator, I can see Nathan Orr is in there and has access to that folder. I can easily just turn that folder off for him if I want to, or I can actually grant him access. Maybe he also needs access to this particular folder of housing architects, for example. Maybe it's a separate company, for example. Maybe he's working for both. I can add Nathan Orr in here as an example. I can add in his name. I can give him what permission. Okay, well, I want him to have, maybe I want him to have view, download, publish, and various different levels of access in here. So if I just give him view and download access, actually, I will give him full upload access. The reason I give him upload access to the work in progress folder is because he's going to need to put files in there. So he has to have that level of access in there. So I'm going to add him as as I'm an administrator here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh Nathan's window here on the right hand side. So I'm going to enlarge that. I'm going to press refresh. And what you'll notice is he has now access to that housing architect folder. So he has access to two folders. Within those folders, then he will add his design files or related information that he's working on. There are other ways that he can work from these folders as well. For example, if I get up my Autodesk docs, or that's my photograph that I put in my presentation. So what I can see here, I'll put it onto screen. For any of my folder structure that I see inside Autodesk docs, I can also install something called the Autodesk Desktop Connector. So that gives me the exact same access that I have in the background. I can go into this exact same project that I'm into, that I have as the administrator here. I can see the exact same ACC Resi Project Dublin, and I can see the same folder structure that I have access to inside here as well. So we can see all of those folders that I have access to, and Nathan Orr will have the same access as well, only whatever he's been granted folder access for as a result of that as well. So I can have complete access to those folders through my desktop. So that allows you then to work on files potentially from your desktop. It depends on the type of files that you're working from, whether it's Revit or Navisworks or CAD or PDF. There's some slight nuances there, but we can look at those in further sessions. But by and large, you can control that folder access, and then you can work from your own desktop from AutoCAD, and you can sync your AutoCAD file, for example. You can even sync your Revit files in different methods as well into this environment. So it depends how you want to work, or you can just drag and drop files in here. So let's say I want to drag and drop a file into this environment, and as you know, let's say the architectural team, I could take a file from anywhere on my desktop. So just a moment, I can grab a file here, and I'm going to take I'm just going to find a PDF drawing that I know I have here somewhere. Just a moment. So there we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just dragging a multi-page PDF into the architectural folder. I'm going to drop that in, and that's going to upload that file. Now, there are other ways to work on design-related files, like I said, like AutoCAD and Revit. There are direct integrations for those as well that you can also use on top of Autodesk Docs. The Revit integration, just to make clear, uses something called design collaboration. that is an add-on, but there are other ways to work inside stock as well without that on. Well, I can still drag and drop any type of Revit file in here if I want to. I can drag a Revit file, I can drop that Revit file in, as long as I have the folder permission to do it. You have to have the permission, and that has to be enabled in order to achieve that as well. So that's a couple of different ways you can get files in. Is I can drag and drop, I can upload files, so I can choose a location on my machine. Or again, what I can also do is I can go back to that project, and I will open up that project. Just give me 2 moments on another screen here. I'm going to open up that same project, and what again I'm going to show you is within that folder structure, I could also drag and drop files into this in my Windows Explorer if I wanted to. So I could go architectural width folder. Okay, I've got a file that I need to push in there, for example, and a file that I need to push in there. What I'm going to do again is find another file that I want to drag and drop to show you how kind of straightforward it is. And this time I'm going to grab, I have an IFC file here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to place this IFC file in here. So you can see that's going to upload. It's just a small enough IFC file. That's going to upload into this environment. I may need to refresh. It appears in there immediately. And then if I actually go into the background here, within a couple of minutes, usually seconds, depending on the file, I will also see that ARC IFC file appear in there as well. It may just take a minute, that one is uploading. In the meantime, the IFC file will also appear in here. And because it's the web browser, if you do this on your desktop through that desktop connector, if you upload those files, then obviously another user in different parts of the world, different parts of the country, whatever the case is, or in your own office, they will also see that a file appear in here as well. And they'll also see it appear in their desktop connector as well. So there's a couple of different ways that you can get files into your common data environment. There are then, there are further rules or requirements as part of the ISO document in terms of applying naming conventions. So if you're familiar with the BS 1192 naming standard, that is something on ISO required or ISO 19650 projects that we are required to do. And Autodesk Docs does lend itself to facilitate that. So what you'll notice here is there's kind of files that are maybe not named the clearest. So project number 2.orvt, we've no idea what is that file. If we follow a naming convention, if you're familiar with naming standards, we're able to look at the name of a file and we know immediately the type of file, what's in that file, and who that file came from. So we'll get into that in a moment as well. So that's how you control permissions, and the reason you control permissions is obviously protect your information. And as long as I have access to a folder and I've been granted upload rights, I can drag and drop files into that to my heart's content as much as I need to. And I can create subfolders within here as well. So I can, if I want to go to the architecture width folder or work in progress folder, I go, okay, well, I want just a PDF folder in here, and maybe I want another subfolder, maybe I want an interior design folder in there as well. So if I'm working for the architects and if I'm doing interior design, I can also create subfolders in there as well. And if I need to grant different access to that folder, I can do that as well. I can store InDesign files, by the way. I can also store InDesign and certain Adobe and Photoshop files as part of that as well. So I can create custom folder structure within my subfolders, as long as I have permission to. You can restrict perhaps other contractors or companies that don't have access to your particular, that don't need access to the folders again, or those subfolders. You can completely restrict that if you need as part of that as well. But that's a very high level method of getting files into your work in progress area. So like we looked at in the ISO requirements, if you need to share a file, it needs to go into the shared area. So obviously that's quite important. It needs to go into shared area, but it needs to go through that check review kind of process. So let's say you've put a file into your architectural or structural folder, whatever the case is. You've put a file in here. What can you do with that file once it's in here? Well, you can do a couple of things with it. So let's take a CAD file, for example. So I've got a CAD file here. Let's take a CAD file, for example. Whenever I put a file into my environment, common data environment, it automatically versions it, so called auto versioning effectively. So you can see the IFC file, it's going to be V1. I can see obviously this CAD file, I've uploaded that 7 times or 7 versions of that file. I've uploaded that. And then I also have a Revit file here that I've uploaded 3 times as well. So what I can actually do with those versions is I can click on any version and I can go, okay, well, I want to check this version before I share it with the shared area. I'm going to go, okay, well, I want to compare what's changed between the last two versions. I'll open up those two versions. I've got version 2 and version 3. I can go back to any number version that I want to as well, by the way. So I'm comparing these two versions. And this is all done within the web browser. This is a Revit file that it's done on, but it can be done on an IFC file and a CAD file. And it showed me what has changed in that actual model. This works with quite complex models as well. I just happen to have quite a simple model here. I can see what's modified with that wall. I can click on that wall and go, okay, well, what's actually changed about this? Oh, the doors have been added. So I can click on that wall. I can see the oaks have been added. And I can obviously filter on any items that have been added as part of that Revit file. So it automatically does that. As soon as you upload a file with the exact same file name, it bases it on the file name effectively. And I've got lots of other files in here that I'm able to perform similar type of tasks on as well. I've got another file here. I don't change on this, but I can go back right to previous versions, go, okay, well, I want to compare version 6 to version 2. And maybe you perform this in your own work in progress area before you share out your file. And I can see then there's been a lot of changes from version 2 to version 6. I can see lots of stuff has changed, and I can filter on any of those items that have changed as well. So it does that automatically for you within any of the folder structures that you place the file into part of that as well. And what I'll also show you as part of this is I can also, as part of the CAD file, I can do the exact same thing. So I'm just looking for a relevant CAD file that I have. That one. So it does similar for a CAD file, but it just overlays it. I think the 3D view is a lot more effective. So I should have, let me see this particular one here. So I'm going to compare these two versions. I've got two drawings here. So this is version 6 and version 7. I'm not sure if anything has changed necessarily. So so all that's changed is actually this door detail. You can ignore the roof plan there. So the door detail has changed on this. The door handle has increased, and I can see from version 6 to version 7 what the change has, and I can filter those as well, whichever way I prefer to. So it automatically does that for CAD files, PWGs, and it does it for PDF, vector-based PDF files as well. It will show me that comparison as well. So you're able to check your files before you effectively share them out with the rest of the design team. So let's take that ISO requirement to check and review a file that you need to share out. So let's say we want to share out a particular file. Let's say it is a PDF as an example. So I'm going to take this particular PDF and go, okay, well, we're happy to share this file now. I want to submit that for a review. So what's going to happen here is it's going to go through something called a review process. And if the file is approved on review, it will then be copied into a destination folder within the shared area. So that shared area, that file may not exist there already. It does not exist there already, which is that LTU file for the work in progress. So I'm going to take an architectural work in progress file and I'm going to transfer it to the shared area. So if you keep in mind, our reason for doing that is potentially so other design teams have access to the shared area, but they don't have access to our work in progress area. Let's say the structural engineer now will eventually be able to access the file once I put it through a review process. I'm going to do that now. Once I choose a particular file, as the architect or architectural team, I'm going to choose a particular relevant file here. This one, I'm going to go, okay, I want to submit that for a review. Submit that for a review. I'm going to put it through something called an approval workflow. So I built these templates in the background. This particular one is architectural width, architectural shared. I'm going to give it a name, RV021 as a review name, review title. It's going to send it to this person who also happens to be me. It could be anyone else on the design team, senior designer, or anyone else within your own design team or organization. So what that has now done is it's put it through an approval process. So whoever is on that approval process, whoever needs to approve that document, will receive a notification. They'll receive an email, but they'll also see under reviews that they can come in here and they go, okay, well, there's RVW review number 21. I need to have a look at this. I'm reviewing this file. Okay, I need to review it. Start reviewing that. Start reviewing the file. I can now investigate this file. I can open up the file. I can look at the relevant information that I need to check. If it's a multi-page PDF, I can go through every single page that I need to go through if I want. And I can also create markups if I need, for whatever reason, it isn't, the correct information on the drawing. I can, if I need to, I can create markups on top of this if I need to as well. Even things like revision clouds, various different pen tools as well. So you can get quite detailed in terms of what you want to mark up. With those markups, what I can also do then, I can also assign them back to somebody if I want to as well. I can go, okay, well, this detail needs to be checked. I'm not happy to approve this document. I go, maybe there's a requirement change here. I can create something called an issue, place a push pin, and I can assign that back to the relevant person. So maybe it's assigned back to this Nathan Orr guy, or I can choose the role of the person, or I can choose the company it gets assigned back to. So a couple of different options there. I'm just going to choose this individual. I'm going to say, please increase over size. Spec. So I'm going to send that person a message. Check my spelling as always. Please increase your upsize the client spec. I can, if I want to, then I could attach the client spec if I needed to. I could go into my files area, back into my folder structure, and wherever that file may reside, I could attach that if I wanted to. And therefore, this Nathan Orr guy will have that information and they receive that issue. So, okay, well, I want to submit that. So Nathan Orr immediately will receive a notification with that. They'll have received an email notification to say that an issue has been assigned against them, and they'll see this comment in here. So what they now know is that there is an issue, and they can come in here and they can view the markups and they can see any of the requirements that they need to update the drawing. So I'll just come out of that for a moment. Let's say I'm not happy to approve that. I could obviously reject it if I wanted to, but let's say you've now received the updated drawing from someone. It's gone through the approval process again. You can open up the drawing and you can go, okay, well, I need to look at what issues are on this particular drawing or on this particular sheet. I can go back to that particular drawing number. I can go back to that particular detail or that drawing sheet if I need to. I can navigate to that relevant sheet and I can close that particular issue if I want, or I can also come into the issues tab if I want, and I can review that same issue if I need to as well. I can go, okay, well, that detail has been increased. Filter on that. So there's the requirement change. That's the same one I generated. There's the file attached to, so I can see that file. I can go, okay, well, I'm happy that that's addressed. I can close that issue now. It's been addressed, and I'm happy to approve this document. Submit review. Okay, I'm going to approve it. And what's going to happen now, once it's been approved, it's going to be copied into this final location. So you can see it started here in the work in progress area. It's now been copied into the shared area. So that file is now available for the rest of the design team to access. And it's gone through that check, review, approval process. So that's effectively how you move documents through those various stages. And it's a similar process if you're going from shared into published then as well. It's a very similar process. Obviously, you'll be checking for different types of information as well. So now if I go to the shared architectural folder, for example, if I go to the shared architectural folder, I can see that that file now exists in there. It wasn't there previously. And that file, I can open up that file, and now all of the rest of the design team now has access to that particular file as well. So copy that file across. So a couple of things that I didn't do there was I didn't enforce a naming standard, which is extremely important on ISO 19650 projects. And Autodesk Docs does allow that and that management effectively of the naming standard. So for the naming standard then, what I probably should have done in the first place was I should have had set up on my project was a naming enforcement standard. A naming enforcement standard allows you to work to the ISO 19650 document. So what that means is that I can set up the naming standard. So it can be the project code, originator code, zone, level, type, role, drawing number. And I can apply that to a folder or to a folder structure. I can also apply revision code and status code as well. That's something called related attributes. So what that allows me to do is if someone uploads a file and if it doesn't comply with this naming standard, it will put the file into a holding area. So it kind of maintains that naming standard. So let's say I go back to my files area here. And if I go, for example, if I go into my shared area, I have another folder set up here for interior architects. So what you'll notice on this is I've actually enforced a naming standard. So if I go to this folder and if I could go to more, it says unenforced naming standard. So what I should have really done at the start was I probably should have gone to the entire folder structure and I should have enforced the naming standard on the entire shared area at least, so that any file that's coming into the shared area has this rigor applied to it, that the naming is being checked before it's being put through a process. So let's take this interior architect model, for example, or this PDF file. So there is a drawing file in here and it has a naming, BS 1192 naming standard applied to it. ISO 19650 has requirements for that to be applied on most documents that you're using within your common data environment. The codes represent different elements, the project code, originator. If I can look at this file and go, okay, well, it's 401, it comes from such and such a company. It represents levels and zones of these relevance. It's a drawing because it's DR, and C represents the role that it comes from as well, so civil engineering or whatever the relevance is, and then the number of that particular file. So what that means, whenever I drag and drop a file into a folder that has a naming standard enforced on it, so what I'm going to do again is I'm going to drag a file, but I'm going to drag a file that actually doesn't comply. So let's say I drag this file over here. What you'll see is it prompts me to actually name that file appropriately. So I know that it's dub 001, so it's checking that I've complied, dub 01 is checking that I've complied with this particular file. It's coming from, let's say it's coming from the ABC Architects. The zone is, we'll just call it 00 for now, and then level, we're also just going to say 00 level. And then the type of file that it is, it's a drawing file, so I'm going to call it PR, for example. It's requiring me to put all of this in. It's coming from the architect, let's say, so we'll choose A, and then the drawing number is, I'm going to call it 005. So it's making me check all of this before I actually upload it. And I'm going to put in D03, for example, and the status of this is, I'll just say it's S. So when I upload that file, it now actually renames that entire document when it puts it in. What you'll see now in the background is that file has been uploaded, but it's been entirely renamed as a result of doing that correction in the background. If I didn't correct those red elements that showed when I uploaded it, it would put it into a holding area that only administrators have access to. So if I look at Nathan Orr, for example, Nathan Orr doesn't have access to the holding area. So they would not have seen that file until it complied with the naming standard. Same goes if I upload a file that does comply. So let's say I take a file that does comply, for example. So that example didn't comply, so we had to correct it in the environment. So if I do upload a file that does comply, so let me just find one here for a moment. So I'm going to rename, find one that does comply. The reason I want to show you this, so if I upload that file, let's say, if I upload that file, it automatically takes the code from the name. So this name was in this PDF file already. That's the PDF file that I uploaded. That's a PDF file that I dragged and dropped there, for example. So it automatically knows that that's the project code, originator, zone, level, type, role, and file number as well. So it's populated those automatically, and I can choose to, I can apply my status code or my other codes to this as well. So I'm happy with that. It's automatically populated those. But what it's also done as a result of that, when I go into my file area, and if you come across to attributes on the right-hand side, oh, did I cancel that? I didn't. Okay, so it's uploading that file now. If I go across here on the right-hand side, it automatically populates all of these columns for me as well. Then, so I can see the project code. So it copies this information and it populates it into these additional attributes on the right-hand side. It takes the role, it takes the status, it takes the revision code that I entered in that area as well. So it does that for any file that you upload, as long as you're enforcing a naming standard, which I would always recommend. What I do find is some companies may restrict naming standard to only the shared area. They may have folders in here that don't use a naming standard because it could be files that maybe are never going to be shared or just for internal use, and maybe you just don't need to apply a naming standard to them. But if you're using the shared area and the published area, you should always apply a naming standard for that reason, because I know exactly this particular file. I know it's a drawing file, I know the project, I know who it's come from, I know the level that it represents, I know the number of the file as well. So we know a lot more about the file before I even go and open that particular file as well. and it's populating all of this information for me out to the right-hand side here as well. Something else I probably didn't go into in much detail, and I only touched on it, was actually the issues as well. So even if, you know, I find a design file, for example, in my environment, I can use the issues feature, that pushpin feature, on any type of file in here. Let's say I want to do some sort of internal feedback to colleagues, or maybe give them feedback on the design. I can open up even a Revit file, for example. I can go, okay, you know, the building's looking pretty basic. We need to add some more detail, or whatever the case is. I can go, okay, I want to raise an issue in here, and okay, there's a requirement change, minor issue. I can create custom issues here if I want to. I'm going to say, okay, some client feedback, for example, and I'm going to put an issue on that. I'm going to assign it back to any responsible individual. In this case, it's this Nathan or guy, and I can give that particular person, I can go, please change to walling. That. So then Nathan Orr again will get that email, and Nathan Orr knows in Revit or whatever piece of software that they're working in, they need to update. They need to update that wall to the current wall. And with issues, you can track them in the platform then. So Nathan Orr will only see the issues that he has actually been involved with. He won't see all of the other issues. So if I go in here, Nathan Orr again will see that issue. You see the model that it's been placed on, and you can actually click on the model. And this is bringing Nathan Orr now into the model. You can go, okay, well, what's the issue here? You can open up that model in the common data environment, and you can see that push pin. You can see the comments if you need to as well. You can even put in comments if you need to, or he can open up Revit or whatever piece of software he's working in. He can make that change and then re-upload his file into his common data environment. So I'm kind of conscious of time there. Happy to take any questions now. Obviously, there's certain elements I haven't gone into. I kind of just focused on the folder structure, the permission management, the review process, and then just uploading files and kind of using the naming convention as well. So happy to take any questions. Hopefully that was useful. Thank you. So a couple of questions there. So can I share the recording of the webinar? I certainly can. And another one, where can you find a guide to set up numbering system to be enforced on the folder? So setting up the numbering system. So I suppose you need to be aware of what is the numbering system that's been specified on your project. In a lot of cases, it depends what region, what country you're working in. In a lot of cases, it's going to be the UK annex. And even if you're working on an Irish project, I find it's going to be in the UK annex of the ISO 19650 document. That should be specified in your BIM execution plan, what the naming standard is. I can send you some links. I'm just doing it from an Autodesk perspective, but you need to first clarify what naming standard is being applied on your particular project as well. More than likely for UK and Irish projects, it generally uses the UK annex that's specified in the back of the ISO document as part of that. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you. Any other questions from anyone or any clarification needed? Here's another one. Do other shared file systems meet the requirements of BS ISO 19650 like Dropbox? I suppose what I'll say about Autodesk Docs is it is designed for construction information. I suppose I've never used Dropbox as a common data environment, but things like auto versioning of files and creating approval workflows, I'm not sure if Dropbox can facilitate that. So I suppose Autodesk Docs is specifically made for design and construction projects as well. Okay, yeah. So could you show again the destination folder when going from WIP to shared? Yes, of course. So if I open up the destination folder, set up the destination folder. So what I had there was I had an approval workflow, but what I didn't show was I had built an approval workflow. So I can build a template of an approval workflow. So if I go settings, and if I go to reviews, that's where I should be in. So if I'm an administrator, I can build templates for approval workflows. So I can create these templates, for example. I can get quite detailed, but I didn't go into these. I can create a 1-step, 2-step, 3-step, 4-step approval workflow. So let's take a 2-step one, for example. It's going to start at point A and it's going to land at the final location. I build those in these approval workflows, and I choose to also copy approved files, and then I just choose what the relevant folder is. So it's built into the template effectively. You choose what the final destination folder is as a result of that. Perfect. Thank you. This platform. That's a good question. So somebody has asked, is this the primary place for a company's files, i.e. the main drawings and model files? What I find is it's generally a hybrid version. So people will still work off their internal server. And I have seen companies that have wholeheartedly moved to Autodesk Docs to store all of their files, and they may still leave some information on their server. It depends on the company, to be honest. So it does vary, and the option is there to accommodate both kind of situations. You'll always probably need your own server location to store, accounting, financial, sensitive information that maybe you just don't want in the common data environment. A common data environment is actually a mix. It can be a mix of common data areas, by the way. It doesn't have to be a single platform. It can be multiple platform. That's what makes up your common data environment as well. So different consultants on a project may be using a different folder structure. So it just depends on the project, but it can be used as both as well. Okay, I think most questions are answered. Some I will get back by email. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah, I think that's all. Most of the questions answered. Some of them I will follow up on email if I'm not able to answer them live. But yeah, I think that's everything from me. It was set at 45 minutes webinar, so if there's no more questions, I will leave you guys go. Or if you want to put in any further questions, I'll hang on for a couple of minutes. Oh, so what is a draft approval workflow? Sorry, there's another question from someone. So a draft approval workflow is, I can start creating this workflow, for example, so I can create one, and I might call it MP with the MEP shared. If I save that as a draft, it means it's not yet accessible to the rest of the people that may need to use it. So it just keeps it as a draft effectively. So it's not an active workflow yet. These are custom workflows that you build, by the way, and you can get it as complex or as simple as you need as part of those. Will any CPD certificates be available after each session? We can definitely give you an attendance certificate, and just let me check on the CPD status of it with the guys in Diatech. Okay, thank you everybody for joining. I wish you a good Friday, and have a nice weekend. I'll get an email sent out. I'll just check about the CPD certs that people are asking about. I will send on the recording. You should receive it automatically. We have it set up in Zoom that it automatically gets sent out to you once it's completed. But I'll certainly make sure that happens. Thank you very much.